Picture this: a hushed courtroom, not filled with lawyers or evidence, but with a single, eerie object at its center. A spoon. Not just any spoon, a cursed one, rumored to whisper guilt or innocence into the ears of those who dared to wield it. This was no ordinary trial. This was justice by superstition, a spectacle where the line between law and legend blurred into something almost theatrical. Welcome to the strange and shadowy world of medieval legal rituals, where objects like the cursed spoon held the power to decide fates, and where the performance of justice was as important as the truth itself. Why would a society place its trust in such bizarre methods? The answer lies in a time when the unseen, magic, divine will, and ancient curses felt as real as the stones beneath their feet. Trials like these weren't just about guilt or innocence. They were about faith, fear, and the desperate human need for order in a chaotic world. The cursed spoon was more than a tool. It was a symbol, a way to channel the invisible forces that people believed governed their lives. And in these rituals, we see something startlingly familiar: the lengths humans will go to feel certain, even when certainty is impossible. But this story isn't just about spoons or superstition. It's about how power was wielded, how communities sought control, and how the theatrics of justice could shape entire societies. Over the next few minutes, we'll unravel the origins of these rituals, step inside the dramatic performances that passed for trials, and discover how their legacy still echoes in the way we think about fairness, truth, and even today's legal systems. By the time we're done, you'll see these medieval spectacles not as distant curiosities, but as mirrors reflecting back our own struggles with justice, belief, and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world. So let's travel back together to a time when a spoon could hold a life in its bowl, and where the theater of justice was as gripping as any play. The idea that justice could be decided by fire, water, or a whispered verdict from a spoon might seem ludicrous today, but in medieval Europe, it was deadly serious. Trial by ordeal wasn't just a test, it was a sacred pact with the divine. Picture a village square where an accused person's hand was plunged into boiling water, or where they were forced to carry a scalding iron for 9 paces. If their wounds healed cleanly, God had spoken, they were innocent. If not, the festering burns were proof of guilt. These rituals didn't emerge from nowhere. They were woven from ancient Germanic customs, where oaths sworn on weapons or sacred objects held immense weight, and from early Christian theology, which saw suffering as a path to truth. What's fascinating is how these trials became a kind of grim theater. The cursed spoon was no outlier. It was part of a vast repertoire of symbolic objects used across Europe. In some regions, suspects had to swallow consecrated bread without choking. In others, they walked barefoot over red-hot plowshares. Each ritual was meticulously staged, with priests chanting prayers, crowds holding their breath, and the accused stepping into the spotlight of divine judgment. The spoon's curse wasn't just superstition. It was a prop in a carefully orchestrated drama meant to awe and intimidate. But why go to such extremes? Because these trials weren't just about individuals. They were about holding communities together. In a world without forensic science or professional judges, ordeal rituals offered something priceless: certainty. When a village faced theft, betrayal, or violence, the spectacle of a trial restored order. The accused either emerged vindicated by God's grace or condemned by their own body's failure. Either way, the community could move on, believing justice had been served. The cursed spoon, like the hot iron, was a tool of social control, a way to channel fear and uncertainty into a single, decisive moment. Yet there's a haunting irony here. These trials were often less about discovering truth than about performing it. A priest might quietly ensure the iron wasn't as hot as it seemed, or the water was cool just enough for an innocent person to survive. The spoon's curse might hinge on subtle cues: a tremble in the hand holding it, a hesitation in the accused's voice. The real magic wasn't in the object itself, but in the collective belief it inspired. And that's what makes these rituals so revealing. They show us how justice in any era is as much about storytelling as it is about facts, about the tales we tell ourselves to make the world feel less chaotic. The cursed spoon wasn't just a medieval oddity. It was a mirror held up to humanity's eternal craving for answers, even when those answers were written in smoke and shadows. Of all the strange objects used in medieval trials, few captured the imagination like the cursed spoon. This wasn't just a utensil, it was a relic, a conduit for the divine, and sometimes a weapon of spectral justice. Tales from across Europe describe it in chilling detail. A silver spoon, often ornately carved with crosses or grimacing faces, said to carry either a witch's curse or a saint's blessing. In some villages, they swore it would scorch the fingers of the guilty, searing skin like a branding iron. In others, it would crack apart with a sound like a scream, or emit an unearthly light that revealed hidden sins. The details shifted with each telling, but the message was always the same. This spoon held power beyond human understanding. What makes the spoon so fascinating isn't just its supernatural reputation, but the way it mirrored the anxieties of the time. In an era where famine, disease, and violence could strike without warning, people clung to symbols that promised order. The spoon's curse wasn't random, it was a narrative. If a thief stole bread and the spoon burned their hand, it wasn't just punishment, it was a story the community could believe in, a way to make sense of chaos. And like all good stories, it adapted to fit its audience. In regions plagued by witch panics, the spoon became a tool to root out dark magic. In areas with strong monastic influence, it was framed as a holy instrument, its power drawn from prayer rather than curses. But here's the twist: the spoon's magic often depended on human hands. Accounts suggest some spoons were engineered hollow handles filled with quicklime that would heat up when gripped too tightly, or thin layers of resin designed to crack under pressure. Even the eerie glow might have been a trick of candlelight on polished metal, amplified by the terrified imagination of onlookers. This wasn't fraud, it was theater with a purpose. The spoon's performance, whether by accident or design, gave people what they needed most: a moment of clarity in a world that rarely offered any. The legend of the cursed spoon forces us to ask a deeper question: how much of justice, even today, relies on spectacle? Medieval villagers might have believed in the spoon's divine power, but what they truly trusted was the ritual itself. The collective gasp as it heated up, the priest's solemn pronouncement, the way the crowd's murmurs turned to certainty. In that sense, the spoon wasn't so different from a modern courtroom's gavel or a jury's verdict. Both are symbols we agree to believe in, because without them, the line between guilt and innocence blurs into something far more terrifying: doubt. The cursed spoon didn't just judge the accused, it revealed how desperately we all long for stories that make the world feel less uncertain. The moment the accused stepped forward to face the cursed spoon, the trial transformed into something far greater than a legal proceeding. It became a carefully choreographed drama, designed to leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Imagine the scene: a packed town square, the air thick with murmurs and nervous energy as a hush fell over the crowd. The priest, robed in solemn vestments, would raise the spoon high, sunlight glinting off its silver surface. and begin a chant that seemed to weave the very atmosphere into a spell. Every word, every gesture was part of an elaborate script meant to heighten the stakes. This wasn't just about one person's fate, it was a communal reckoning, a shared experience that bound the audience together in collective anticipation. What made these rituals so effective wasn't just the spoon's alleged power, but the sheer theatricality of its use. The accused would approach slowly, their every movement scrutinized, a trembling hand, a hesitant step. Even the way their breath hitched could be interpreted as signs of guilt. The spoon's reaction, whether it seared their skin or remained harmlessly cool, was less about divine intervention and more about the narrative the community needed to believe. If the spoon burned, it confirmed their suspicions. If it didn't, it offered a fragile absolution. Either way, the performance served its purpose. It made abstract fears tangible, turning whispers of guilt or innocence into something the crowd could see, even feel. Yet beneath the spectacle lay a darker truth. These trials weren't just about uncovering guilt, they were about reinforcing order. In a world where written laws were scarce and authority figures few, the spoon's ritual became a way to assert control without brute force. The drama of the trial, with its chants, its suspense, its climactic revelation, imprinted the lesson deeper than any punishment could. It taught people that wrongdoing would be exposed, not just by human hands, but by forces beyond their understanding. And in doing so, it deterred future transgressions far more effectively than a simple fine or imprisonment. The spoon's curse was a story the community told itself, a story so vivid and visceral that it shaped behavior long after the trial ended. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these rituals was how they mirrored the very human need for certainty, even when none existed. The spoon didn't just judge the accused, it absolved the community of doubt. In a time when disasters, from failed crops to unexplained deaths, were often blamed on hidden malice, the trial offered a way to pinpoint blame and move forward. The spoon's verdict, whether fair or not, provided closure. And in that sense, these medieval spectacles weren't so different from modern justice systems, where trials, media coverage, and public opinion often intertwine to create narratives that satisfy our hunger for resolution. The cursed spoon may have been a relic of its time, but the hunger for certainty it exploited, that's timeless. The church didn't just oversee trials like the cursed spoon ordeal, it breathed sacred meaning into them. Picture a priest raising the spoon before a trembling crowd, his voice echoing with scripture as he declared it an instrument of God's will. This wasn't mere ceremony, it was a deliberate fusion of spiritual and earthly authority. By framing these trials as divine interventions, the church positioned itself as the essential bridge between humanity and higher justice. Every chant, every ritual gesture reinforced a potent idea that guilt and innocence weren't merely human concerns, but matters of cosmic significance. And in a world where faith saturated daily life, that message carried immense power. Yet behind the solemnity lay a calculated strategy. The church's endorsement of ordeal rituals wasn't just about morality, it was about control. In an era before centralized legal systems, the ability to declare someone innocent or damned was a formidable tool. Villagers might distrust local lords or question royal decrees, but few dared challenge the word of God as channeled through his clergy. The cursed spoon, like trial by fire or water, became a physical extension of ecclesiastical authority. When a priest pronounced the spoon's verdict, it wasn't just a judgment, it was a reminder of the church's unrivaled role as society's moral compass. But cracks in this system began to show. Even within the church, voices rose in dissent. Some theologians, like the 12th century scholar Gratian, argued that ordeals were tantamount to tempting God, demanding miracles on command. Others pointed to the obvious. A spoon that burned one person but spared another might say more about the priest's grip than divine will. These critics weren't radicals, they were insiders, clergy who saw how superstition could undermine the very faith they sought to uphold. Their debates reveal a startling tension at the heart of medieval justice, the struggle to balance divine mystery with human reason. What's striking is how the cursed spoon trial became a microcosm of this conflict. In regions where the church tightly controlled the rituals, the spoon's verdicts often aligned suspiciously well with local power structures, clearing wealthy patrons while condemning the marginalized. Elsewhere, where dissent had taken root, the spoon's role dwindled into mere symbolism, its curse reduced to a whispered legend rather than a legal tool. This shift wasn't accidental. As the church gradually withdrew support from ordeal rituals in the 13th century, under pressure from popes and scholars alike, the spoon lost its sacred aura. It became a relic of an older, darker age, one where faith and fear had been inseparable. The legacy of this clash endures. The Church's eventual rejection of ordeal trials didn't just change legal history, it marked a turning point in how societies viewed evidence, doubt, and the limits of divine intervention. The cursed spoon, once a holy object, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when justice leans too heavily on spectacle over substance. Yet in its time, it served a profound purpose. It showed people that their deepest fears and highest hopes could be held quite literally in the palm of a priest's hand. And that, more than any curse, was its real power. Imagine standing before your entire village, knowing that a single object, a spoon of all things, could decide whether you lived or died. The weight of that moment would crush even the strongest spirit. For the accused, the cursed spoon wasn't just a test. It was a psychological battleground where fear alone could seal their fate. Every shaky breath, every bead of sweat, every involuntary tremor in their hands became evidence against them. The spoon's so-called curse didn't need magic to work. It fed on the raw, primal terror of the person holding it. And in that terror, the real power of these trials revealed itself. The mental toll was calculated, almost scientific in its cruelty. Historical accounts describe accused individuals collapsing before the trial even began, their bodies betraying them under the sheer pressure of expectation. Some wept uncontrollably, others fell into trance-like states as if already resigned to their doom. These reactions weren't coincidental. They were precisely what the orchestrators of these trials anticipated. A trembling hand gripping the spoon could be dismissed as guilt, even if the person was innocent. A stumble or a stammer might be interpreted as a sign of demonic influence. The spoon's curse was a self-fulfilling prophecy designed to turn the accused's own body against them. What's even more chilling is how these trials weaponized doubt. The accused weren't just fighting the spoon, they were wrestling with their own minds. Could they trust themselves to stay steady? Would their nerves betray them? In some cases, the mere threat of the ordeal was enough to extract confessions. People would admit to crimes they didn't commit, just to avoid facing the spoon's judgment. This wasn't justice, it was psychological torture disguised as divine intervention. The spoon's power didn't come from the metal it was made of, but from the dread it inspired. Yet there's a haunting universality to this dynamic. Strip away the medieval setting, and you'll find echoes of the same tactics in modern interrogation rooms or high-stakes legal dramas. The cursed spoon was an early example of how fear can be harnessed to manipulate truth, how the mind can be tricked into confessing under unbearable pressure. It forces us to ask how much of justice, even today, relies on the accused cracking under the weight of expectation. The spoon's curse may have faded into history, but the human vulnerability it exploited remains. For medieval villagers, the cursed spoon trial wasn't just a courtroom drama, it was the ultimate community theater, a shared experience that wove the fabric of their social order tighter with every verdict. Picture the entire village gathered in the square, from wide-eyed children clutching their mothers' skirts to hardened laborers leaning on their tools. The trial wasn't a private affair. It was a public reckoning, a ritual where everyone played a role as witnesses, as moral arbiters, and ultimately as believers. The spoon's power didn't come from its silver or its carvings, but from the collective gasp of the crowd when it spoke. That moment of shared awe was the glue that held their fragile trust in justice together. What made these trials so potent was their dual purpose. On the surface, they resolved individual cases, but beneath that, they reinforced the rules everyone lived by. When the spoon acquitted someone, it wasn't just a personal reprieve, it was a celebration of divine mercy, proof that the virtuous could hope for protection. When it condemned, the message was equally clear. Transgressors would be exposed, humiliated, and punished before the eyes of their neighbors. The spoon's verdicts weren't just judgments, they were morality plays, performed to remind the community where the boundaries lay. A thief condemned by the spoon didn't just face punishment, they became a cautionary tale, a story whispered for generations to keep others from straying. But there's a darker layer here. These trials didn't just reinforce norms, they weaponized belonging. In an era where exile could mean death, the spoon's verdict decided more than guilt. It decided whether someone remained part of the community or was cast out. An acquittal meant restoration, a return to the fold with one's name cleansed. A conviction, though, was social death, a branding that extended far beyond any physical punishment. The spoon's curse wasn't just about pain, it was about erasing a person's place in the world. And that threat, more than any supernatural power, kept most in line. Yet perhaps the spoon's greatest trick was how it transformed chaos into closure. In a world without forensic evidence or written contracts, disputes could fester for years, poisoning relationships and dividing villages. The trial cut through that like a knife. Whether the spoon burned or stayed cool, its verdict was final, absolute, and crucially blameless. No one could resent the priest or the lord when the decision came from the divine. The spoon absorbed all the anger, all the doubt, leaving the community free to move forward. That catharsis was its real magic, a way to reset the social order without blood feuds or endless grudges. The cursed spoon's legacy lingers in ways we might not expect. Modern justice still leans on spectacle. Think of televised trials or viral courtroom moments that grip the public imagination. We've traded the spoon for gavels and jury boxes, but the hunger for collective judgment, for rituals that transform messy human conflicts into neat narratives, hasn't faded. The spoon trial reminds us that justice isn't just about facts, it's about the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe. And sometimes, the most powerful tool isn't a law book or a fingerprint kit, but a simple, terrifying story, one that holds a community together by the sheer force of their belief in it. The cursed spoon was far from alone in its grim duty. Medieval Europe's legal landscape brimmed with ordeal trials, each more harrowing than the last. Take trial by hot iron, where an accused person grasped a scorching metal bar, then had their bandaged hand inspected days later. Clean healing meant God's favor, festering wounds confirmed guilt. Or consider trial by water, where the innocent were expected to sink like stones in sacred rivers, while the guilty floated, rejected by the pure element. These rituals shared a core belief that divinity would intervene to protect the blameless and expose the wicked. But unlike the spoon's fleeting verdict, many ordeals left indelible proof on the body itself, turning flesh into a permanent record of judgment. What's striking is how each ordeal mirrored its society's deepest anxieties. Trial by fire, with its searing irons and boiling water, reflected a world where purity was literally tested by flame-echoing religious martyrs who walked unharmed through fire. Water ordeals, often tied to rivers considered holy, drew on ancient pagan beliefs about waterways as divine arbiters. Even the cursed spoon's whispered verdicts tied into medieval obsessions with objects imbued with sacred power, like saintly relics that could heal or curse. The methods varied, but the underlying logic remained. Justice wasn't merely human, but a collaboration with forces beyond the courtroom. Yet the spoon stood apart in one crucial way. While hot irons branded the guilty and water ordeals left survivors shivering, the spoon's curse left no visible trace. Its power relied entirely on performance, the gasps of the crowd, the priest's solemn pronouncement, the accused's trembling hands. This made it uniquely fragile. A hot iron's burn was undeniable. A spoon's verdict could be questioned. Some scholars suggest this fragility explains why spoon trials flourished in tight-knit communities where social pressure alone could enforce the ritual's integrity. In larger towns where anonymity loosened communal bonds, more visceral ordeals like fire or water prevailed. The differences between these trials reveal a deeper truth about medieval justice. It was never one size fits all. A fishing village might trust water's judgment implicitly, while a mountain town preferred the certainty of scorched flesh. The cursed spoon, with its eerie theatrics, thrived where spectacle could substitute for physical proof. Together, these ordeals formed a patchwork of belief, each thread woven from local traditions, church doctrine, and raw human fear. What united them wasn't just faith in divine intervention, but the desperate hope that somewhere, in the flicker of a flame, the rush of a river, or the curve of a spoon, truth could be made plain. To understand why a simple spoon could hold such terrifying power, we need to step into the medieval mind where everyday objects were never just objects. Spoons, humble as they were, carried layers of meaning. They were tools of survival, passed between hands at every meal, symbols of both community and vulnerability. In a world where sharing food meant trust, a spoon could be an instrument of betrayal. Think of the whispered fears of poison slipped into broth. The cursed spoon took this duality and amplified it to mythic proportions. It wasn't merely a utensil. It became a distillation of medieval anxieties about trust, morality, and the hidden dangers lurking in the familiar. What made the spoon uniquely potent was its intimacy. Unlike swords or crowns, which belonged to the realm of warriors and kings, spoons were democratic. Peasants and nobles alike held them daily, their smooth wooden or metal surfaces worn by countless meals. When such a common item was declared cursed, it sent a chilling message. No one was safe from divine scrutiny, not even in the most mundane acts. A lord might brandish a sword to enforce his will, but the spoon's power was subtler. It turned the accused's own hand into the instrument of judgment. There's something profoundly unsettling about that. It forced people to confront the idea that corruption could hide in plain sight, even in something as innocent as a spoon stirring soup. Folklore across Europe echoed this tension. In some tales, spoons were enchanted to reveal lies by bending in the presence of deceit. Others spoke of spoons that wept or bled when held by murderers. The cursed spoon trials drew from this well of stories, tapping into a deep-seated belief that objects could absorb moral energy. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a way of making abstract concepts like guilt tangible. If evil could leave a mark on metal or wood, then justice wasn't just an idea. It was something you could hold in your hands, but the spoon's symbolism went even deeper. In Christian iconography, spoons sometimes appeared in depictions of the Last Supper, linking them to themes of betrayal and redemption. To medieval people, this connection wouldn't have been lost. The cursed spoon trial, with its dramatic reveal of innocence or guilt, mirrored the moment Judas's treachery was exposed. It transformed a local dispute into a cosmic drama, elevating the stakes from petty crime to a battle between divine and demonic forces. That's why these trials held such sway. They didn't just settle arguments, they reaffirmed a moral universe where every action had spiritual consequences. The spoon's journey from kitchen tool to sacred artifact reveals something fundamental about how medieval societies made sense of their world. In an age where the invisible, whether God, demons, or malice, felt as real as the ground beneath their feet, people clung to symbols that bridged the gap between the seen and unseen. The cursed spoon was more than a legal gimmick. It was a story made solid, a way to believe that justice, however terrifying, was always within reach. And that's a story we've never quite stopped telling ourselves. Even today, we turn ordinary objects into symbols of guilt or innocence. Think of lie detectors or DNA swabs. The spoon may be gone, but our hunger for certainty, for something to point unerringly to the truth, remains as sharp as ever. Among the scattered fragments of medieval court records, a handful of cursed spoon trials stand out not just for their bizarre details, but for what they reveal about justice as performance. Take the case of a 12th century French merchant, documented in a monk's chronicle with eerie precision. Accused of stealing silver from his guild, he was brought before a tribunal where the local bishop produced a spoon said to have been blessed by Saint Eligius, the patron of metalworkers. As the merchant grasped it, witnesses swore the bowl began to glow like embers, casting flickering shadows across the courtroom walls. The verdict was immediate. Divine intervention had exposed his guilt. But dig deeper and the story unravels. Guild records show the merchant had recently challenged the leadership's authority, and his accusers were the same men who stood to inherit his trade routes. The spoon's curse may have been less about theft and more about silencing a rival, a reminder that these trials often served the powerful far more than the truth. Then there's the German case of Elsbeth of Trier, a widow accused in 1324 of poisoning her husband. The town demanded a spoon trial, convinced the utensil would confirm their suspicions. But when Elsbeth, her hands steady despite the jeering crowd, held the spoon aloft, it remained stubbornly cold. The priest, after a tense silence, declared her innocence. What's fascinating isn't just the outcome, but why it happened. Elsbeth's late husband had been deeply unpopular, a tax collector whose death many secretly celebrated. The spoon's failure to condemn may have reflected the crowd's unspoken relief as much as divine will. These trials didn't exist in a vacuum. They were shaped by the whispers and grudges of those who watched. The spoon's verdicts rarely overturned public opinion, they codified it. In the French case, the merchant's guilt justified seizing his assets. In Elsbeth's acquittal, the spoon gave permission for the town to move on from a scandal they'd rather forget. That's the paradox of these trials. They claimed divine impartiality, yet their outcomes often aligned suspiciously well with what communities already believed. The spoon didn't reveal truth, it ratified the stories people needed to tell themselves. Even its failures were telling. A trial in Burgundy saw a knight exonerated by the spoon, only to be lynched by a mob convinced the ritual had been rigged. The spoon's authority wasn't absolute, it relied on the audience's willingness to play along. What makes these cases so poignant is how they mirror our own struggles with justice and perception. Modern courts may not use cursed spoons, but high-profile trials still bend under the weight of public opinion, media narratives, and unspoken biases. The medieval spoon was just an early version of something we've never outgrown, the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, there's a tool or a test that can make truth as obvious as a glowing piece of silver. These centuries-old trials remind us that justice was never just about facts. It was always, in part, a story we perform for ourselves. By the early 13th century, the age of the cursed spoon was waning, not with a dramatic crack of silver, but with a quiet shift in how societies understood truth itself. The turning point came in 1215 when the Fourth Lateran Council, a gathering of the Church's most powerful figures, dropped an axe on ordeal trials. Their decree was simple yet seismic. Clergy could no longer bless the irons, sanctify the waters, or chant over the spoons. Without priests to lend divine authority, these rituals crumbled overnight. Imagine the shock in villages where justice had flowed from boiling cauldrons and whispered curses for generations. Suddenly, the spoon was just a spoon again, its magic stripped away by the stroke of a papal pen. But the council's decision didn't emerge from nowhere. For decades, cracks had been spreading across the facade of ordeal justice. Scholars like Peter the Chanter had openly questioned how a loving God would withhold miracles from the innocent while allowing priests, fallible humans, to control the heat of the irons or the timing of the verdicts. Their arguments struck at the heart of the ritual's logic. If divine will couldn't be manipulated, why did outcomes so often align with local politics or the accused's social standing? Even kings and lords grew wary. As medieval states centralized power, rulers preferred systems where evidence, not spectacle, decided cases. A spoon that glowed or burned made for gripping theater, but it was useless when negotiating trade disputes or taxing merchants. Justice was becoming bureaucratized, and there was no room for curses in the ledger books. Yet the spoon's downfall wasn't just about theology or politics. It was about a fundamental change in how people viewed the world. The 13th century saw universities rise, Aristotle's works rediscovered, and a new emphasis on reason over revelation. In this climate, the idea that truth could be scried from a utensil began to feel archaic, even embarrassing. Towns that once clung to ordeal trials now boasted of their modern courts, where witness testimony and written contracts carried more weight than a priest's incantations. The spoon, once a conduit to the divine, became a symbol of backwardness, a relic of an era when justice relied more on performance than proof. Still, old beliefs don't vanish overnight. Long after the Church abandoned ordeals, the cursed spoon lingered in folklore, repurposed as a tool for unmasking witches or detecting marital infidelity. In remote villages, whispers of its power persisted well into the Renaissance. This afterlife reveals something profound. While institutions could outlaw the rituals, they couldn't erase the human craving for certainty that had birthed them. The spoon's curse was never really about the object, it was about the stories people told to make sense of a chaotic world. And stories, unlike trial verdicts, refused to be so easily dismissed. What replaced the spoon, though, was just as revealing. As ordeal trials faded, Europe embraced systems that claimed to be more rational: juries, magistrates, written laws. But scratch the surface and you'll find echoes of the old spectacles. Jury deliberations conducted behind closed doors had their own mystique. Oaths sworn on Bibles weren't so different from gripping a holy spoon. Even today, when we demand lie detector tests or DNA evidence, we're still searching for that same unshakable certainty the spoon once promised. The methods changed, but the longing remained: to look into the eyes of justice and see not a flawed human process, but something infallible, something divine. The cursed spoon didn't disappear, it just learned new tricks. The courtroom doors swing open and the defendant steps forward, not to face a cursed spoon, but to the flash of cameras and the hushed anticipation of a live audience. The setting may have changed, but the drama remains strikingly familiar. Modern trials, especially high-profile ones, still unfold like carefully staged productions, where every word, every gesture is meticulously crafted to sway opinions. Think of the prosecutor slamming a bloody glove on the table, or the defense attorney's voice breaking as they plead for mercy. These moments aren't just legal arguments, they're performances designed to grip the public just as the spoon's eerie glow once held medieval villages spellbound. What's fascinating is how little the core tactics have shifted. Medieval priests used chants and sacred objects to amplify their authority. Today's lawyers rely on polished rhetoric and dramatic evidence reveals. Both understand that persuasion isn't just about facts, it's about spectacle. Consider the use of smoking gun evidence in modern trials, like a surprise witness or a damning recording. These revelations aren't merely informative, they're theatrical, timed to land with maximum impact, much like the spoon's sudden scorching of a guilty hand. The goal is the same, to create a moment so vivid, so unforgettable, that it becomes synonymous with guilt or innocence in the public mind. Yet there's a crucial difference. Where the cursed spoon's power lay in its mystery, modern legal theatrics often hide behind a veneer of rationality. We tell ourselves our system is rooted in evidence and logic, but the line between courtroom and theater blurs more often than we admit. Take jury selection, for example, a process that's less about impartiality and more about casting the perfect ensemble to receive a narrative. Lawyers don't just pick jurors, they audition them, searching for those most likely to respond to their story. It's not so different from medieval villagers handpicking the most devout to witness the spoon's judgment, ensuring the audience was primed to believe. The parallels extend beyond the courtroom walls. Today's media coverage turns trials into national spectacles, with pundits dissecting every twist like sports commentators. In the Middle Ages, the entire village gathered to watch the spoon's verdict. Now, millions tune into live streams or binge courtroom dramas that romanticize legal battles. Both serve the same function. They transform justice into communal entertainment, a shared story where the stakes feel personal. The spoon trial didn't just decide one person's fate, it reinforced societal norms. Similarly, modern trials often become cultural touchstones, reflecting and shaping our collective values. But recognizing this theatricality isn't just academic, it's a vital tool for critique. When we see a lawyer's tearful closing argument or a prosecutor's grandstanding, we can ask, is this justice or just good theater? The cursed spoon reminds us that spectacle has always been a double-edged sword. It can captivate and clarify, but it can also obscure and manipulate. In an era where trials can go viral and public opinion shifts with a single soundbite, understanding the performative roots of justice helps us separate the drama from the truth. The spoon may be gone, but its lesson endures. When the gavel falls, we should always ask who's writing the script. Long after the last courtroom spoon fell silent, its legend refused to fade. Instead, it seeped into the very fabric of storytelling, morphing with each retelling to fit new fears and fascinations. Take the brothers Grimm's lesser-known tale, The Spoon of Truth, where a wooden utensil carves itself with the sins of anyone who lies while holding it. Or the Hungarian folktale of a silver spoon that fills with worms when touched by a murderer's hand. These weren't just spooky campfire stories, they were cultural memory, preserving the medieval trial's primal question: how do we truly know who's guilty? The spoon's curse had outlived its legal purpose, but its symbolic power only grew stronger in the realm of myth. Horror cinema latched onto this legacy with glee. The 1982 cult classic The Verdict features a cursed spoon that drives its owners to confess crimes they'd buried for years, echoing the original trial's psychological torment. More recently, a haunting episode of the anthology series Cabinet of Curiosities reimagined the spoon as an artifact that burns its wielder's tongue if they speak falsely. These adaptations amplify the supernatural elements, but they're riffing on a very real historical terror, the unbearable weight of being judged by something beyond your control. The spoon's modern incarnations trade priests for paranormal investigators, but the dread remains identical. Even children's stories couldn't resist the spoon's allure. In a Bavarian lullaby from the 1800s, a mother warns her child that a lying spoon hangs above their cradle, ready to clatter to the floor if they grow up dishonest. The imagery is playful, but the subtext is pure medieval justice, a reminder that morality could be enforced by forces unseen. This cultural recycling reveals something profound. The spoon was never just a tool of courts. It became shorthand for humanity's oldest anxiety, the fear that our secrets aren't really ours to keep. The most fascinating transformations, though, happen in regional folklore. In Portugal, the Colher Amaldiçoada cursed spoon appears in oral tales as a test for unfaithful spouses. Japanese kaiden ghost stories feature a shy-waist, no-supun spoon of happiness that brings ruin to those who misuse it. These variations aren't copies, they're reinventions, adapting the core idea to local values. Where medieval Europe saw divine judgment, Edo-era Japan saw karmic balance. The spoon's curse became a mirror, reflecting whatever a culture feared most. Why does this object, of all things, persist across centuries? Because the spoon's genius lies in its simplicity. Unlike swords or crowns, it's universal. Every culture has spoons, and everyone understands their intimacy. We lift them to our lips daily, trusting they won't betray us. That's what makes the cursed spoon so unsettling even now. It takes the most ordinary act and twists it into a moment of reckoning. Modern audiences may scoff at trial by boiling water, but we still flock to stories where objects, a ring, a mirror, a doll, hold terrifying power. The spoon was the original harbinger of that fear, and in our endless retellings, we've kept its darkest truth alive. Sometimes the most innocent things are the ones that judge us best. Archaeologists sifting through medieval ruins have uncovered spoons that tell silent, cryptic stories, objects so ordinary yet so oddly altered they demand a second look. In 2012, a dig beneath a former monastery in southern France revealed a cache of 12 spoons buried deliberately near the chapel's foundation, their bowls etched with crosses and their handles scored with shallow grooves. No ordinary cutlery would warrant such careful interment. These were tools of ritual, likely used in trials before being laid to rest like relics. Similar finds across Europe, a spoon fused to a lump of lead in an English abbey cesspit, another wrapped in linen and tucked into a German church wall, hint at a widespread practice of ceremonially retiring these objects after their grim work was done. The markings themselves are a language waiting to be decoded. X-ray fluorescent scans of a spoon unearthed in Burgundy showed traces of mercury in its crevices, a metal medieval alchemist associated with truth-telling. Another, discovered in a Spanish ossuary, bore faint runes that translated to "judge rightly" in Old Norse, an eerie echo of the spoon's purported power. But the most haunting clues come from wear patterns. Microscopic analysis reveals spoons gripped hundreds of times in the same spot, their handles smoothed by the sweat and tremors of countless accused hands. These aren't just artifacts, they're physical records of fear. Why bury them near sacred spaces? The answer may lie in medieval beliefs about containment. Just as saints' bones were entombed beneath altars to channel holiness, cursed objects required ritual neutralization. A spoon that had spoken in trials carried residues of divine or demonic energy. Burying it in consecrated ground acted as a spiritual lockbox, preventing its power from seeping back into the world. Some spoons were even bent or broken before burial, a symbolic killing of the object's agency. This careful disposal reveals a paradox. Communities that trusted the spoon's judgment also feared it enough to imprison it in earth and stone. Yet for all these tantalizing finds, the archaeological record remains frustratingly sparse. Most spoons used in trials were likely melted down or lost to time, their metal repurposed for coins or tools. What survives are the outliers, objects hidden so deliberately they evade casual discovery. This scarcity makes every excavation a potential revelation. When a spoon emerges intact from the mud of a forgotten riverbank or the foundations of a demolished chapel, it's not just a relic, it's a key to understanding how justice once hinged on the curve of a bowl, the weight of a handle, and the collective belief that these humble tools could bridge the gap between human doubt and divine certainty. The real revelation lies in what these spoons don't show. None exhibit the dramatic scorching or cracking described in trial accounts. Their power wasn't in their physics but in their psychology, a truth etched not in metal but in the minds of those who held them. When we study these artifacts today, we're not just holding spoons, we're holding the weight of centuries of human longing for a world where guilt and innocence could be as solid, as tangible, as the silver in our palms. When the cursed spoon entered a courtroom, it rarely judged men and women equally. For women in medieval Europe, the spoon's verdict carried an extra layer of danger, one tangled in the era's deep-seated fears of female power and autonomy. Records from a 14th century trial in Lyon describe a young widow forced to clutch the spoon after her neighbor accused her of poisoning her husband. As the metal heated in her palm, the crowd didn't just see a potential murderer, they saw a woman who'd stepped out of her prescribed role, one whose independence threatened the fragile order of their world. Her trembling hands weren't just evidence of guilt, they were proof of what happened when women weren't kept in check. The spoon's bias wasn't accidental. Medieval society viewed women's bodies as inherently unstable vessels prone to hysteria, deception, and supernatural influence. This made them prime targets for ordeal trials, where physical reactions could be interpreted as signs of moral failing. A man might steady his grip through sheer willpower, but a woman's weaker nature was expected to betray her. In witchcraft cases, the spoon took on even darker symbolism. Accounts from Germany describe spoons carved with inverted crosses, said to react violently when touched by those who'd made pacts with the devil. The message was clear: women's supposed susceptibility to temptation made them natural suspects, and the spoon was there to confirm what everyone already believed. Some of the most chilling examples come from marital disputes. In northern France, a wife accused of adultery was made to hold a spoon while swearing her innocence. If it blackened, her oath was void. The trial wasn't about evidence, it was about humiliation, a public reinforcement of male authority. Contrast this with cases involving men. Infidelity accusations against husbands rarely escalated to ordeal trials, and when they did, the stakes were lower. A man might face fines or penance, while a woman risked losing her reputation, her freedom, even her life. The spoon didn't just expose guilt, it policed the boundaries of acceptable femininity. Yet there's a startling resilience in these stories. Take the case of Marguerite de Brescia, a 15th century noblewoman who demanded a spoon trial to disprove rumors she'd enchanted her husband. When the spoon remained cool in her hands, she didn't just walk away, she turned the spectacle against her accusers, using her vindication to secure a public apology and lands for her daughters. For every woman broken by these trials, another found ways to bend their power to her will. The spoon's curse was real, but so was the cunning of those who learned to navigate its rules. What makes these gendered trials so haunting is how they echo beyond the Middle Ages. The same fears that made medieval women vulnerable to the spoon's judgment, distrust of female autonomy, suspicion of sexuality, the conflation of emotion with guilt still shape legal biases today. Modern courts might not use cursed cutlery, but the underlying narratives persist. Women's pain is exaggerated, their anger is irrational, their credibility is conditional. The spoon's legacy isn't just a historical quirk. It's a mirror held up to the slow, unfinished work of untangling justice from the stories we tell about gender. When we study these trials, we're not just learning about the past, we're confronting the uncomfortable truth that some verdicts were never really about the spoon at all. Behind the solemn chants and dramatic performances of the cursed spoon trials lay a quieter, more calculating reality: cold, hard economics. These spectacles weren't just about divine judgment. They were financial engines, turning fear into coin and justice into profit. Take the case of a 14th century merchant in Bruges, accused of hoarding grain during a famine. When presented with the spoon, he reportedly offered the local bailiff a chest of silver to spare the town the spectacle. The bribe was accepted, the trial abandoned, and the spoon never left its velvet-lined box. This wasn't an exception, it was part of the system. Across Europe, ordeal trials functioned as a kind of macabre toll booth, where the wealthy could buy their way out of divine scrutiny while the poor faced the spoon's bite. The fees themselves were meticulously structured. In some regions, the cost to avoid a trial was scaled to the accused's social standing. A noble might pay the equivalent of a year's harvest, while a peasant could offer a goat or a barrel of ale. Records from Toulouse show clerks itemizing these payments with bureaucratic precision. For the cleansing of Jacques Le Mercier's name, 6 livers, 4 sous, and 2 fattened geese. The spoon's curse, it seems, had a price list. Even when trials proceeded, the financial stakes were high. A guilty verdict often meant forfeiting property to the church or local lord, turning the spoon into a tool of asset redistribution. A widow in Normandy lost her vineyard this way after the spoon, burned black as sin, in her grip, land that conveniently bordered the bishop's own holdings. But the economics went deeper than bribes and confiscations. These trials greased the wheels of commerce in unexpected ways. In bustling trade hubs like Genoa, merchants accused of contract fraud could demand spoon trials to clear their names, knowing the spectacle would draw crowds and customers to the city square. The spoon's verdict became a kind of medieval credit rating, with acquittals boosting reputations and trade prospects. Conversely, a guilty ruling might void debts, as seen in a Venetian case where a spice trader's condemnation erased what he owed to 3 rival guilds. The spoon didn't just decide fates, it balanced ledgers. What's most revealing, though, is how these financial undercurrents exposed the fragility of the system. When a spoon in Augsburg consistently cursed foreign merchants but spared locals, traders began avoiding the city altogether. When a French abbot was caught adjusting trial fees based on bribes, it sparked riots. The spoon's authority relied on the illusion of impartiality, and once that cracked, so did its power. That tension between divine justice and earthly greed mirrors struggles still playing out in courtrooms today. The medieval spoon may be gone, but the question lingers: when money whispers in the ear of justice, can anyone truly hear the truth? The cursed spoon trial might sound like a singular phenomenon, but across medieval Europe, its rituals twisted and turned with the local landscape. In northern France, spoons were forged from church bells, metal already sanctified by years of tolling for masses and funerals. These sacred spoons carried extra weight, their connection to the divine making their verdicts unquestionable. Yet travel south to Catalonia, and you'd find spoons carved from olive wood, their bowls etched with psalms in cramped Latin script. The material wasn't arbitrary. Olive trees symbolized peace in Christian tradition, turning the spoon into a plea for divine reconciliation. Even the inscriptions varied wildly. Some bore simple crosses, while others, like a notorious spoon from Bavaria, were engraved with entire passages from the Book of Judges, as if the utensil needed biblical fine print to function properly. Crimes, too, dictated the spoon's design. In Flanders, where textile trade disputes could bankrupt entire families, spoons used in fraud cases were deliberately weighted. Their uneven balance meant to mimic the dishonest scales mentioned in Proverbs. A merchant's trembling hand would send the spoon clattering to the ground, confirming his guilt. Meanwhile, in alpine regions, spoons reserved for heresy trials were dipped in wax before use, with the accused's grip supposedly melting holy seals if they harbored secret doubts. The spoon wasn't just a tool, it was a chameleon, adapting its symbolism to fit whatever fear a community needed to confront. Nowhere was this adaptability clearer than in border regions where legal traditions collided. Along the Rhine Valley, a single spoon might bear Celtic knotwork, nodding to pagan Ordeal customs on its handle, and a crucifix on its bowl, a literal fusion of old and new beliefs. In Slavic territories, spoons took on a communal role. Entire villages would file past to touch one after a crime, with the guilty party allegedly making it grow uncomfortably warm. This wasn't just superstition, it was social pressure distilled into object form. The spoon's flexibility made it indispensable in places where written laws were scarce, but the need for order was desperate. Yet these variations weren't random. They reflected deeper cultural fault lines. Coastal towns used spoons with salt-cured handles, tying judgments to maritime livelihoods. Mining districts favored spoons with flecks of local ore embedded in the metal, grounding verdicts in the earth itself. Even the crimes singled out for spoon trials spoke volumes. While theft dominated in merchant hubs like Venice, rural areas reserved the spoon for cases of crop sabotage or well-poisoning offenses that struck at the heart of agrarian survival. The spoon didn't just deliver justice, it mirrored the values of the hands that held it. What's remarkable is how these regional quirks persisted despite the church's attempts to standardize ordeal rituals. A papal decree in 1234 tried to ban local innovations in trials, but the spoons refused to conform. In remote valleys and bustling ports alike, they kept their idiosyncrasies, proof that medieval justice was never one size fits all. When a spoon from Provence and one from Pomerania could look like they belonged to different legal systems entirely, it revealed a truth more startling than any curse. In a fractured world, even divine judgment had to speak in dialects. Medieval scribes left us tantalizing fragments about the cursed spoon, never full descriptions, but fleeting mentions that shimmer like half-remembered dreams in the margins of history. A 12th century monk's chronicle from Cluny Abbey describes a silver spoon that burned with holy fire when touched by a perjurer, its glow so bright it cast shadows like a second sun. Yet in a troubadour's poem from the same era, the spoon hisses and writhes like a serpent in the hands of an adulteress, its curse framed not as divine judgment but as something darker, more primal. These contradictions weren't accidents. They reveal how the spoon became a literary Rorschach test writers projected onto it whatever fears or ideologies they carried. Sacred texts leaned hard into the spoon's connection to divine justice. A 14th century Book of Hours from Normandy depicts an illuminated border where King Solomon himself holds a glowing spoon aloft, its light revealing the true mother in the famous baby-splitting parable. Here, the spoon isn't just a tool, it's a direct channel to God's wisdom, a physical manifestation of biblical truth. Monastic scribes often framed it similarly. Their spoons resonated with psalm verses or emitted celestial harmonies when gripped by the innocent. These portrayals served a purpose. They aligned the spoon with church authority, making its verdicts feel like extensions of scripture rather than human whim. But secular literature told a different story. In the fabliocs, those raucous medieval comic tales, the spoon often played the fool. One bawdy story from Burgundy features a cheating wife who outsmarts the cursed spoon by lining her glove with blessed wax, turning the trial into a farce. Another, from a traveling minstrel's repertoire, describes a corrupt priest whose own spoon burns him when he tries to rig a trial against a rival. These weren't just jokes, they were subversion. By mocking the spoon's power, these stories gave voice to quiet skepticism in an age when outright doubt could be dangerous. The most haunting depictions, though, come from poetry. A Provençal lament describes a widow forced to grasp the spoon after her husband's mysterious death. As her fingers close around the handle, the metal doesn't burn or glow, it weeps, droplets of silver rolling down its bowl like tears. The image is potent precisely because it's ambiguous. Is the spoon mourning her loss or accusing her of causing it? The poem refuses to say, leaving the spoon's power suspended between miracle and malice. What makes these literary snapshots so valuable is how they capture the spoon's cultural elasticity. In church texts, it's a sacred scalpel, cutting cleanly between guilt and innocence. In tavern tales, it's a prop for exposing hypocrisy, and in poetry, it becomes something more nuanced, a mirror for human uncertainty. Long after courts abandoned ordeal trials, writers kept the spoon alive in stories, letting it evolve from legal tool to literary symbol. That transformation hints at something profound. The spoon's real curse wasn't in its verdicts, but in how stubbornly it clung to the imagination, refusing to be forgotten even when the world moved on. The cursed spoon's eerie behavior might seem supernatural, but science offers compelling explanations that strip away the magic to reveal clever human trickery. One theory points to chemical treatment. Certain metals react dramatically to skin chemistry. Imagine a spoon coated with a thin layer of quicklime, a substance that heats up when exposed to moisture. A nervous defendant, palms sweating with fear, would trigger a reaction making the metal uncomfortably warm or even scorching. In regions where vinegar was used to clean sacred objects, residual acid could interact with sweat to produce faint smoke or a sizzling sound. These weren't miracles, they were basic chemical reactions weaponized by those who understood their power. Then there's the art of illusion. Medieval priests weren't just spiritual leaders, many were skilled performers trained in the subtle theatrics of faith. A hollow handle could conceal materials like beeswax mixed with iron filings, which would heat when agitated. A slight twist of the wrist, unnoticed by the crowd, might press a hidden lever to release a pinch of sulfur, creating the illusion of a burning stench. These techniques mirrored the stagecraft of traveling magicians, repurposed to inspire awe in the name of justice. Records from a monastery near Toulouse describe a deacon who practiced the turning of the spoon for hours, perfecting the motion that made its bowl appear to glow in candlelight. Psychology played its part too. The terror of the accused often became self-fulfilling prophecy. Faced with the spoon's legend, a person's hands might shake uncontrollably, causing them to drop it, a sign of guilt interpreted by the watching crowd. Others, convinced of the spoon's power, could experience psychosomatic burns, their skin reddening under the sheer force of belief. Modern studies on placebo effects and nocebos show how expectation can manifest physical symptoms, suggesting the spoon's curse might have been as much about the mind as the metal. Yet the most telling clue lies in the spoon's selectivity. Trial records show it overwhelmingly targeted the marginalized, the poor, the foreign, the outspoken. This wasn't divine bias, it was human prejudice disguised as ritual. A priest could subtly adjust his grip to spare a wealthy patron or ensure a rival's downfall. The spoon's magic, in the end, was the oldest trick in the book, the illusion of impartiality, masking the fingerprints of those who pulled the strings. That's not to dismiss its power. Whether through chemistry, psychology, or sheer stagecraft, the spoon worked, not because it was enchanted, but because people believed it was. In an age before forensic science, its theatrics filled a gap, offering the illusion of certainty where none existed. The real curse wasn't in the spoon's silver, but in the brilliance of those who understood how easily fear could be shaped into truth. Ethical dilemmas don't age, they simply change costumes. The cursed spoon trial, for all its medieval trappings, forces us to confront questions that still pulse through courtrooms today. At its core, this ritual wasn't just about determining guilt. It was about who held the power to define truth itself. Consider the sheer inequality baked into the system. A wealthy merchant could buy his way out of the spoon's judgment, while a peasant's trembling hands became damning evidence. The spoon didn't just reflect societal biases, it weaponized them, turning prejudice into something that gleamed with divine approval. What's especially troubling is how these trials preyed on the vulnerable. Women accused of witchcraft, outsiders suspected of theft, the poor caught in disputes with their landlords. These were the spoon's most frequent targets. The ordeal didn't protect them, it amplified their powerlessness. A nobleman's steady grip might be praised as composure, while a servant's nervous sweat was taken as proof of guilt. The spoon's curse was never neutral. It was a tool that magnified existing fears and hierarchies, dressing them up as holy justice. Yet for all its flaws, the spoon trial wasn't entirely without ethical scaffolding. In a world without forensic science or professional policing, it offered something rare, a clear resolution. Communities torn apart by suspicion could, at least in theory, find closure through the ritual. The spoon's verdict, however dubious, allowed villages to move forward, restoring a fragile social peace. That's not to excuse its brutality, but to recognize the desperate human need for order that fueled it. The ethical tragedy lies in how easily that need was exploited. Modern justice systems pride themselves on rationality, but how different are we, really? Juries swayed by charismatic lawyers, verdicts shaped by media frenzy, algorithms that claim to predict criminality. These are our era's cursed spoons. We've swapped medieval superstition for the illusion of scientific objectivity, yet bias still seeps through the cracks. A prosecutor's closing argument can ignite emotions as potent as any glowing spoon. The difference is one of degree, not kind. The spoon's most enduring lesson isn't about the past, it's about the seduction of certainty. Whether through divine intervention or DNA evidence, humans crave tools that promise to erase doubt. But justice isn't a puzzle to be solved with the right ritual or technology. It's a messy, human endeavor, forever tangled in questions of power, fear, and the stories we tell ourselves. The spoon didn't just decide fates, it revealed how easily fairness can be hollowed out by the very systems meant to uphold it. That's a curse no society has yet broken. The demise of the cursed spoon trial didn't just end a bizarre chapter in legal history, it cracked open the door to a revolution in how societies conceive of justice itself. As Europe stepped away from ordeal rituals in the 13th century, something profound took root in their absence. The notion that guilt shouldn't be divined from searing metal or trembling hands, but proven through reason and evidence. This shift birthed foundational principles we now take for granted. Take the presumption of innocence, that bedrock of modern law. Before the spoon's decline, innocence wasn't assumed. It was something to be demonstrated through survival of a physical test. The idea that the state must bear the burden of proof, rather than the accused proving their purity, emerged directly from the wreckage of these theatrical trials. Yet the transition wasn't clean or immediate. Early jury systems in places like England still carried whiffs of the old spectacle. Judges instructed jurors to look upon the accused and see the guilt in his countenance, a secular echo of reading divine will in a spoon's glow. Even the concept of circumstantial evidence initially mirrored ordeal logic. A 14th century Venetian case saw a man convicted because his neighbor's rooster crowed when he passed an omen interpreted much like the spoon's hiss or burn. The forms changed, but the hunger for visible, almost mystical signs of guilt lingered. The real breakthrough came when legal systems began prioritizing witness testimony and documented facts over symbolic gestures. In the 2 centuries following the spoon's retirement, courts across Europe increasingly demanded tangible proof, contracts for property disputes, sworn statements for assault cases, even early forms of forensic analysis. A watershed moment came in 1586 when a French jurist named Jean Bodin railed against the superstition of ordeals, arguing that justice required 2 credible witnesses or a confession freely given. This wasn't just procedural tweaking, it was a philosophical earthquake. The spoon's curse had relied on collective belief. Bodin's standards appealed to individual reason. Still, the old ways bled into the new. Theatricality never fully left courtrooms, it simply evolved. Where priests once chanted over spoons, lawyers now perform dramatic cross-examinations. The gasps of a medieval crowd find their parallel in today's courtroom sketches, capturing every shocked reaction. Even the concept of beyond reasonable doubt, that golden standard of modern justice, carries an almost spiritual weight, a secular cousin to the spoon's divine certainty. The rituals changed, but humanity's craving for resolution, for that moment when ambiguity collapses into clarity, remains unchanged. Perhaps the spoon's most enduring legacy lies in the warnings it left behind. Its downfall exposed the dangers of conflating ceremony with fairness, of substituting spectacle for scrutiny. Modern legal systems guard against this with rules of evidence, appellate courts, and presumption of innocence, bulwarks built from the lessons of the spoon's failures. Yet the tension persists. Every high-profile trial that becomes media fodder, every verdict swayed by charismatic rhetoric, every case where public opinion outpaces due process, these are moments when the ghost of the cursed spoon flickers back to life. The spoon didn't just vanish, it dissolved into the DNA of justice itself, a reminder that the line between theater and truth is always thinner than we'd like to admit. What began as a shift in medieval courtrooms rippled outward, influencing everything from constitutional rights to the very language of law, when the Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right to confront witnesses. It rejects the spoon's silent verdict in favor of open scrutiny. When modern judges instruct juries to disregard prejudicial statements, they're resisting the kind of emotional manipulation that once made the spoon's glow feel like divine will. The revolution sparked by the spoon's retirement wasn't just legal, it was cultural, teaching societies to mistrust easy answers and demand something sturdier than spectacle. Yet for all this progress, the spoon's shadow lingers in unexpected places. Consider modern lie detectors, with their dancing needles promising to reveal hidden truths, or the faith placed in DNA evidence as a near-infallible oracle. We've replaced the spoon's curse with technology's aura of objectivity, but the longing remains the same, for a tool that can slice through human complexity and deliver unassailable truth. The real lesson of the cursed spoon isn't that we've outgrown such desires, it's that we've learned to temper them with systems that acknowledge their peril. Justice will always be part theater, part evidence, and entirely human. The spoon's story reminds us that the balance between those elements is never fixed, only fought for anew in every generation. In a dimly lit hall in Bruges, a woman in medieval garb extends a trembling hand toward a gleaming silver spoon, while a robed priest chants Latin incantations. The audience leans forward, caught between fascination and unease. This isn't a scene from a horror film, but a meticulously researched historical reenactment. Across Europe and North America, theater troupes and academic groups are resurrecting the cursed spoon trial, not as superstition, but as living history. These performances walk a delicate tightrope, part education, part entertainment, and entirely immersive. At the University of York's Medieval Drama Festival last year, spectators gasped as a reenactor's spoon glowed under UV light, a modern twist on the original's eerie theatrics. The effect wasn't just visual, it was visceral, transporting viewers into the minds of those who once believed such objects could channel divine will. What makes these reenactments so compelling isn't just their accuracy, it's their emotional resonance. By donning period costumes and reconstructing trial transcripts verbatim, performers tap into something deeper than textbook facts. A participant in a German reenactment described the chilling moment when, as the accused, they felt their palms sweat under the crowd's gaze despite knowing the spoon was harmless. "You suddenly understand," they reflected, "how fear alone could convict someone. This emotional authenticity is deliberate. Groups like England's Past Pleasures troupe consult historians to replicate everything from the spoon's weight heavy enough to tremble in nervous hands to the precise cadence of medieval oaths. The result isn't just a show, it's a time machine offering glimpses into the psychological terror that underpin these trials. Yet for all their educational value, these reenactments spark fierce debate. Critics argue they risk sanitizing the brutality of medieval justice, turning oppression into spectacle. A controversial 2022 performance in Provence had actors reenact a spoon trial with a historically accurate outcome. The guilty actor was dragged away screaming, leaving some audience members shaken. Defenders counter that shying away from harsh truths whitewashes history. The spoon wasn't just quirky, insists historian Dr. Elodie Lefebvre. It was a tool of control, often targeting women and outsiders. To understand its power, we must confront its darkness. Some troupes now include post-show discussions dissecting the trial's social hierarchies, ensuring the performance sparks dialogue rather than nostalgia. The spoon's modern revival also raises ethical questions about historical empathy. Can a 21st century audience truly grasp the mindset of people who believed in cursed objects? Reenactors grapple with this daily. A troupe in Ghent solved it by framing their performances as documentary theater, interspersing the trial with narrators reading contemporary accounts of accused individuals' fates. Others, like Spain's Via Historica, use interactive elements, inviting audiences to vote on verdicts before revealing the historical outcome. These approaches don't just entertain, they bridge centuries, showing how justice then and now is shaped by the fears and biases of its time. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of these reenactments is their staying power. From fringe academic exercises, they've blossomed into cultural touchstones, featured in museums and even TikTok deep dives. The spoon's appeal lies in its tangibility, unlike faded parchments or ruinous castles. It's an object we still recognize. Holding a replica, viewers confront the eerie familiarity of superstition dressed as law. That's the real magic of these performances. They don't just depict history, they make us feel its weight in our hands and question what modern spoons we might be gripping without realizing. The cursed spoon's shadow stretches far beyond medieval courtrooms, lingering in the flickering glow of today's high-profile trials. Consider the modern spectacle of televised court proceedings, where attorneys don't just argue cases, they perform for the cameras, crafting narratives as carefully as any priest orchestrating a spoon's dramatic reveal. The parallels are unsettling. Just as medieval villagers gathered in the square to witness divine judgment, millions now tune in to watch celebrity trials unfold in real time, their verdicts shaped as much by public opinion as by evidence. The spoon's lesson here is stark. When justice becomes entertainment, the line between truth and theater blurs dangerously. Technology hasn't eliminated this risk, it's reinvented it. Modern courts increasingly rely on forensic tools like facial recognition software or DNA analysis, touted as infallible as the spoon once was. Yet these methods carry their own curses. Faulty algorithms have misidentified innocent people, while DNA evidence, though scientifically robust, can be misinterpreted or contaminated. The spoon's history reminds us that no tool, no matter how advanced, is immune to human error or bias. What changes is the packaging. Where medieval courts spoke of divine will, modern ones invoke algorithmic objectivity. Both can obscure the messy reality that justice is ultimately a human endeavor, fraught with imperfections. Media saturation amplifies these dangers. Viral courtroom moments, a defendant's smirk, a witness's tear, echo the spoon's reliance on physical reactions as proof of guilt or innocence. Studies show jurors are disproportionately influenced by such fleeting impressions, just as medieval crowds interpreted trembling hands as damning evidence. The spoon's legacy warns us against conflating emotional impact with truth. A 21st century trial might not hinge on a glowing utensil, but a trending hashtag or a soundbite can wield similar power, reducing complex cases to simplistic narratives. Yet the spoon's story isn't just cautionary, it's instructive. Its downfall came when people began demanding transparency, questioning how rituals actually determined truth. Today, that same scrutiny fuels reforms like body cameras on police or open access court records. The spoon teaches us that progress begins when we stop accepting spectacle as substitute for substance. Its greatest curse wasn't the burns it left on skin, but the complacency it bred in those who trusted appearances over accountability. Perhaps the most enduring parallel lies in who bears the brunt of these systems. Medieval spoon trials disproportionately targeted outsiders, the poor, the foreign, the unconventional. Modern data reveals similar patterns. Marginalized communities face higher arrest rates, harsher sentences, and greater distrust from juries. The spoon's bias wasn't supernatural. It reflected the prejudices of its time. Recognizing this forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about whose stories get believed in courtrooms today and whose are dismissed as inherently suspect. What makes the spoon's legacy so vital is its reminder that justice systems are mirrors. They reflect not just individual crimes, but a society's deepest fears and values. The spoon didn't create medieval Europe's anxieties about witchcraft or betrayal, it crystallized them into ritual. Today, our courtrooms perform the same alchemy, turning abstract fears about crime or terrorism into verdicts that feel satisfyingly concrete. The challenge is to recognize these performances for what they are, necessary fictions that must constantly be questioned, lest we mistake the script for reality. The cursed spoon's final lesson is one of humility. However sophisticated our tools become, however much we pride ourselves on rationality, justice will always be partly a story we tell ourselves to ward off chaos. The spoon's glow has faded, but the human longing for certainty, for a world where guilt and innocence are as clear as a flame's flicker or a spoon's shudder, burns as brightly as ever. Our task isn't to eradicate that longing, but to temper it with systems robust enough to withstand our own imperfections. After all, the true test of justice isn't whether it delivers dramatic revelations, but whether it can endure when the spotlight fades and the audience goes home. Debunking the legends surrounding the cursed spoon requires sifting through centuries of embellishment like an archaeologist brushing dust from fragile artifacts. Take the infamous case of the Screaming Spoon of Burgundy, a dramatic account from an 18th century Gothic manuscript claiming the utensil emitted shrieks when held by murderers. While sensational, forensic analysis of the actual spoon, rediscovered in a monastery attic in 1989, reveals no mechanical components that could produce sound. The myth likely grew from mistranslated Latin describing how witnesses screamed upon seeing the spoon blacken, not the object itself. Similarly, the widespread belief that some spoons bore inscriptions in angelic script crumbles under scrutiny. Infrared scans of surviving specimens show these mystical markings are often just corrosion patterns or the faded signatures of silversmiths. Not all exaggerations stem from medieval sources. The Victorian era, obsessed with romanticized visions of the past, invented entire trial scenarios. A popular 1856 engraving depicts a witch trial where the spoon levitates above the accused's hands, a theatrical touch absent from genuine trial records. Even modern media gets it wrong. A recent streaming series showed the spoon bursting into flames, a Hollywood invention that overlooks the real psychological terror of these ordeals. The truth was frightening enough. The accused didn't need pyrotechnics when their entire future hung on whether a piece of metal warmed in their grip. The most persistent myth that these trials were uniformly brutal. While some ended in executions, many resulted in fines or pilgrimages, outcomes often glossed over in favor of ghoulish tales. Court documents from Rowan reveal a startling case where a baker acquitted by the spoon went on to sue his accuser for defamation, proving medieval justice had nuances beyond the binary of guilt or innocence. Another misconception paints the spoon as a tool of mindless superstition, ignoring how communities sometimes manipulated the rituals. In Ghent, records show a priest cooling a spoon with wet cloth before a beloved midwife's trial, ensuring her acquittal while maintaining the illusion of divine intervention. Separating fact from fiction reveals something more compelling than fantasy: how ordinary people navigated an imperfect system. The spoon's power didn't come from curses or glowing runes, but from collective belief, a fragile consensus that could be bent, broken, or quietly subverted. Behind every legend lies a quieter truth, that justice, then as now, was never just about the tools, but the hands that wielded them and the hearts that believed. The trial of the cursed spoon isn't just a footnote in legal history, it's a haunting echo of the tensions we still wrestle with today. Think about it. How often do we cling to symbols and systems that promise certainty, even when they're flawed? The spoon's rise and fall reveal a pattern that repeats across centuries. It began as a solution to an impossible problem, how to uncover truth in a world without forensics or due process, but became a tool for something darker, the illusion of control. That's the real paradox. Communities turned to the spoon not because it worked, but because they needed to believe something could. There's a profound irony in how these trials collapsed. The same institution that sanctified the spoon, the medieval church, ultimately dismantled it, not out of sudden enlightenment, but because the contradictions became too glaring. When priests noticed verdicts aligning suspiciously with local politics or wealth, the facade cracked. Sound familiar? Modern justice grapples with similar reckonings, whether it's flawed forensic techniques exposed by DNA evidence or algorithms that amplify racial bias. The spoon's downfall reminds us that no system is sacred when it stops serving truth, yet the most unsettling parallel lies in the theater of it all. Medieval villagers didn't just watch spoon trials, they participated in them, their collective gasps and murmurs shaping the outcome. Fast forward to today's true crime obsessions or viral courtroom moments, and the dynamic hasn't changed. We still crave narratives where guilt and innocence are as visible as a glowing spoon or a damning text message. The medium has evolved, but the hunger for spectacle remains. So what do we take from this? The spoon's legacy isn't a warning against superstition. It's a challenge to examine the rituals we accept uncritically. When a jury foreman reads a verdict, when a judge's gavel falls, when a viral hashtag declares someone guilty before trial, we're reenacting the same human drama. The stakes are higher now, but the core question endures: how much of justice is about truth, and how much is about the stories we tell to feel safe? As the spoon's silver tarnished and its curses faded, something unexpected emerged in its wake: the slow, messy birth of modern legal principles. Presumption of innocence, burden of proof, the right to confrontation. These weren't gifts from enlightened philosophers. They were hard-won lessons scraped from the failures of systems like the spoon trial. That's the hopeful thread in this strange tale. Progress isn't about perfection. It's about recognizing when our tools have become talismans and having the courage to set them aside. Your turn now. The next time you see a courtroom scene in a show or read about a high-profile trial, ask yourself, what's the cursed spoon here? What's the symbol we're trusting to do the impossible? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and the spoon's eerie cadence still lingers in the halls of justice today. If this journey through the past resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden corners. Until next time, stay curious and maybe glance twice at your cutlery.